Welcome to Value Plays Only, where a turn 1 wheel is just to even out the mulligans. Today, we have Tyler, playing Dargo the Shipwrecker and Tymna the Weaver. This deck looks to loop Dargo with Relic of Legends or Burgi and a Sacrifice Outlet, or it can win with Underworld Breach. His hand contains Altar of Dementia, Demonic Tutor, Sacrifice, Dark Ritual, Mox Opal, Arcane Signet, and Scrubland. John is playing Zurgo Stormrender. This deck is all about tokens, and Zurgo turns them into card advantage. It can win with Abdel Adrian loops, Dualcaster Mage, or Underworld Breach. His hand contains Mayhem Devil, Lotho Corrupt Sheriff, Mondrak Glory Dominus, Deflecting Swat, Chrome Mox, Raucous Theater, and City of Brass. Cammy is playing the third Doctor with Vislor Turlough. This Sultai deck is built to push a lot of value. It can win with Food Chain or Thassa's Oracle. Vislor Turlough is also a card advantage engine if you swim. Her hand contains Displacer Kitten, Sylvan Library, Flusterstorm, Dark Ritual, Soul Ring, Forbidden Orchard, and Watery Grave. Dan is playing Etali, Primal Conqueror. This deck wins by casting Etali early and often. He can win with Food Chain or any of his opponent's win conditions. His hand contains Wheel of Fortune, Imperial Recruiter, Sowing Mycospawn, Elvish Spirit Guide, Lotus Petal, Gemstone Caverns, and Carplusion Forest. And with that, let's see some value plays. Dan has a pregame action, putting a Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Sowing Mycospawn. Tyler then starts things off with a Scrubland. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black mana to his pool. He uses 2 on an Arcane Signet. Tyler spends his last one and Signet on Altar of Dementia. He then casts Mox Opal. Opal is online and Tyler taps it to play out a Goblin Welder. The rest of the table now understands what the word turbo means and question their hands, their decks, and their life choices. Tyler passes. John plays City Brass for turn. He casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Mayhem Devil. He then taps out, taking 1 from City Brass for a Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. John passes. Cammy plays a Watery Grave for turn, untapped, paying 2 life. She taps it for a Dark Ritual, adding 3 black mana. She spends 1 on a Soul Ring. Lotho triggers, and John loses a life and makes a treasure. Cammy then spends all her mana for her commander, Vislor Turlough. Cammy goes to End Step, and Vislor triggers, drawing a card and losing 6 life. Cammy passes. Dan untaps and casts a Lotus Petal. He plays Carplusion Forest for turn. He exiles Elvish Spirit Guide from his hand to cast Treasonous Ogre. Lotho triggers, and John loses a life and makes a treasure. The table reevaluates what Turbo means again, and Ogre resolves. Dan pays 21 life into Ogre for 7 red mana. He uses this to cast his commander, Etali, Primal Conqueror. Etali enters and triggers. Dan exiles Squee the Immortal, Professional Facebreaker, Opposition Agent, and Birds of Paradise. He casts all the creatures, and they all join his growing board. Dan then pays 9 life for 3 more red mana to cast Wheel of Fortune. Cammy responds with a Noxious Revival, paying 2 life, targeting Dark Ritual in her graveyard. Dark Writ returns to the top of her library, and Wheel resolves. Everyone discards their hand and draws 7. Dan now pays 6 life for 2 more red mana, casting Pyretic Ritual. He spends 2 of his mana on a Talisman of Impulse. He pays a life into the Talisman for a green and casts Metamorphosis, sacrificing Etali as an additional cost. He adds 8 more red mana, then spends all 9 on Etali. Etali enters and triggers. Dan exiles Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, Yawgmoth, Thran Physician, and Abrupt Decay. He casts Yawgmoth, Abrupt Decay targeting Altar of Dementia, Path to Exile targeting Goblin Welder, and Lightning Bolt targeting Lotho. Lotho dies to Bolt, Welder is exiled, Tyler declines his search due to Opposition Agent, Altar is destroyed, and Yawgmoth resolves. At 3 life and totally out of gas after a perfectly normal Etali turn 1, Dan passes. Tyler untaps and casts Mox Diamond, discarding Polluted Delta. He casts a Lotus Petal. He then plays Gemstone Mine for turn. Tyler then pays 3 for a Relic of Legends. He then casts Delny, Streetwise Lookout. He taps Delny through Relic to cast a Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. Tyler passes. John untaps and plays a Swamp for turn. He takes 1 to cast Animate Dead, targeting Lotho in his grave. Lotho is returned to the battlefield. John then cracks his treasures to cast his commander, Zurgo Stormrender. Lotho triggers, and John loses a life and makes a treasure. John then passes. Cammy untaps and plays a Mana Confluence for turn. She casts a Dark Ritual, adding 3 black mana for what feels like the 5th time this game. She spends 2 on an Orcish Bowmasters. Lotho triggers, and John loses a life and makes a treasure. Bowmaster enters and targets Dan, dealing 1 damage to him. This puts Dan down to 2. Cammy pays a life to cast Food Chain. The table gets a bit uneasy, but it resolves. Cammy exiles the Orc Army for a blue creature mana Food Chain and spends her last floating black on Gilded Drake. It enters and targets Etali. Dan considers sacrificing Etali to Yawgmoth to kill the Bowmasters, but is then reminded that due to the way state-based actions are checked, he would actually have to pay the life and put a Bowmaster trigger on the stack from his draw before the Orc would die. Since Dan is at 2 life, he has no choice but to let Gilded Drake resolve, swapping control with Etali. Cammy goes to end step and triggers Vislor, drawing a card and losing 4 life. Cammy then passes. Dan untaps and thinks about the blaze of glory that led him here. He goes to combat, swinging Professional Facebreaker at Tyler and Gilded Drake at John. They take the damage and Facebreaker triggers to make 2 treasures. Dan activates Facebreaker, sacrificing a treasure to exile the top card of his library, which is a Birds of Paradise. He casts it. He activates Facebreaker again, exiling Deflecting Swat. With nothing left, Dan passes. Tyler untaps and casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He goes to combat and swings Ragavan at John. Delny makes it so John can only block with Lotho, which is less than ideal. John warns him that he will make the trade to keep him off 2 Ragavan triggers and 2 Tymna draws, but Tyler doesn't care. John blocks Ragavan with Lotho and both creatures die. In his second main phase, Tyler casts his own Lotho. Tyler passes. John untaps and casts Grim Hireling. He goes to combat and swings Zurgo at Cammy. Zurgo triggers to make a 1/1 warrior tapped and attacking Tyler. John shows Cammy a card in his hand to persuade her to let Zurgo in. Tyler blocks the warrior with Tymna. Tyler gains 2 life from Tymna, Cammy takes 3, the warrior dies, and Zurgo triggers to draw a card. Grim Hireling triggers to make 2 treasures. Bowmaster then triggers and deals 1 to Dan. In his second main phase, John casts Goblin Bombardment. Lotho triggers twice through Delny, and Tyler takes 2 and makes 2 treasures. John follows it up with a Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. He then passes. Cammy untaps and exiles Vislor for 5 blue creature mana, and casts Miss Hollow Griffin. The table sinks in despair. Dan, being the only interactive person left, shows the table a Pyroblast in hand, but says he's not very incentivized to use it right now as he eyes the Goblin Bombardment on field. John agrees not to shoot Dan on his turn if he saves them. Dan casts Pyroblast, targeting Mist Hollow Griffin. A saddened Cammy tries to think of a way to deal the last point of damage to Dan to get a spell off the stack. She's unable to, and Mist Hollow Griffin is countered. Cammy is now forced to pivot. She exiles her Orc army for another mana and casts her other commander, the Third Doctor. Lotho triggers twice, and Tyler loses 2 and makes 2 treasures. The Third Doctor enters, and Cammy makes a clue. She taps out to crack the clue and draw. Not finding any more gas, Cammy passes. Dan untaps and goes to combat. He swings Professional Facebreaker at John and Gilded Drake at Tyler. They take the damage, and Dan makes 2 treasures. He cracks them both to Facebreaker and exiles City of Traders and Misty Rainforest. With nothing else to do, Dan just plays the City of Traders and passes. Tyler untaps with no hand. He draws a card and then casts it, which is Tainted Pact. Tainted Pact resolves, and Tyler exiles the top card of his library, which is Underworld Breach. He stops for a while, thinking if this is good enough, and decides it is. He adds Breach to hand. Tyler then casts Underworld Breach. Lotho triggers twice, and he loses 2 life and makes 2 treasures. He exiles 3 cards from his graveyard to escape Altar of Dementia from his graveyard. It resolves. Tyler then cracks 2 treasures for a red and spends 1 to cast his other commander, Dargo the Shipwrecker. Dargo resolves, and Tyler sacrifices it to Altar of Dementia to mill 7 cards. He then escapes Goblin Bombardment from his grave. With this in play, Tyler is ready to present a loop. He casts Dargo for 1 red mana. When it resolves, he taps it to Relic of Legends for another 1 mana, and then sacrifices it to Goblin Bombardment to ping an opponent for 1 damage. He can spend the 1 he just made on Dargo again, and proceed to cast and sack Dargo, pinging each opponent for 1 until all of his opponents are dead. With that, Tyler wins the game. So, what do we learn today? Don't let Tymna players get in. Those 2 draws you prevented could be Tainted Pact and Underworld Breach. If you have any suggestions for commanders we should play or other tips for the video, leave them below. Until next time, keep making value plays.
Does somebody want to let me in so that we can kill Dan here? But you can block with Lotho if you want, and we can all go to shit. Or we can kill Dan.
Dude, if you attack me, I'm gonna block it.
I don't care.
Alright, I'm gonna block
That's
it.
That's crazy.
Alright.
This is crazy. The guy's a psychopath. Alright, and Dan is somehow alive. I was gonna draw 2 cards.
That's fine. Sorry, draw 2, exile 2, make 2 triggers.
Right. What
That's
am I
pretty
exiling
cool.
from you that I care about?
Shoot.
That's why I said I wish I had some cards to interact. That'd be so.
I had to spend the mana if I wanted to out Dan.
No, I got you.
I couldn't have left it up.
Right, but you didn't have to do any of that. Let's just go back to square 1. And I attacked you and I said, let's just kill
I
Dan
like
right
the other
this
stuff.
second.
You killed my Lotho, that sucks. I gave you a fair shake, I'm just saying.
You did.
Alright then, fuck it. I'll go Tainted Pact.
God, I love him.
He'll exile everything
Yep.
between the top and it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm actually
You see why I don't let him draw?
I can't trip.
I'm actually thinking about that a lot, actually.
Yeah, that's really good.